Chief Operating Officer of Pasteur Labs, a simulation intelligence startup, and founder of Spirare Care, where she coaches and advises executives, startups, and founders on leadership and responsible innovation. She is also a senior fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School's Mostafa Rahami Center for Business and Government, where she focuses her work on artificial intelligence policy. Alejandra's leadership spans deep tech startups, global corporations, and national security institutions. She has served as Vice President of Ethical Innovation at Takata, shaping product and governance strategies across 80-plus countries, led a think tank for Meta on XR, privacy-enhancing technologies, and digital identity, developed responsible AI offerings at McKinsey's Quantum Black, and she actually began her career as a U.S. naval officer and engineer. Her work consistently integrates product strategy, system design, and execution in complex environments. She holds degrees from U.S. Naval Academy, MIT, Harvard Law School. Previously, she was a non-resident fellow at Georgetown University Center for Global Health, Science, and Security. Alejandra also speaks and writes on leadership and technology and mentors women and veterans in tech. Now today's is going to be another moderated interview with Alejandra, so let's give her a warm welcome. Alejandra, welcome to VMI, and thank you for taking time from what looks like a very busy schedule to me across many different industries. And we really brought you here because you have great insights into this world of technology and the complex changes that are occurring on a daily basis that might cause some ethical issues, and I know that's your space. So before we get into some questions, and we'll take some questions later on from the audience, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing as the COO at Pasteur Labs and your other work?
Oh, happy to share. So at Pasteur Labs, we're building a platform to do some physics simulation powered by AI. This is really exciting because, as many of you know, there's a lot of acceleration in technology right now, in digital technologies, and it's starting to intersect with hardware. And so we're building something that makes it easier for everything in the world of industrial engineering, which intersects a lot with defense and other sorts of sectors, trying to accelerate how it is that we innovate in those spaces. And so as COO, my job is to really just make sure that the vision that we have as a company, that our CEO and founder have, actually come to fruition. So it's a lot about taking our product team, taking our design team, taking our engineers, working with legal teams, and actually making sure that all of that comes together in a way that we can be proud of when we launch. And so it's that kind of through line of designing systems, whether they're technology systems or organizational systems, and designing them in such a way that it really empowers and enables people to achieve things that they can be proud of. That's really kind of the through line for all the work that I do, whether it's at Pasteur Labs or in my little consultancy and then beyond. And then some of the work that I'm doing at Harvard right now, more focused on AI policy, is kind of thinking from a broader perspective, what are some of the incentives we can design as a society to kind of create these societal systems that, again, do the same thing, enable people to do things that they can, at the end of the day, say they're proud of.
Yeah, great. Well, you have the right combination of intellect and make it happen kind of things that every company wants in a COO. So that's great. So today we're going to talk a lot about this space and innovation. But before we do that, let's try and define for the audience a couple of terms. The first one is adaptation as opposed to innovation. Would you like to take that one as the first question?
Sure. I think that's a great opening question. When I think of adaptation, which by the way is its own set of challenges, it's a difficult thing to do, to adapt. But I think of stepping into a different situation, and you have to kind of iteratively figure out how you can still succeed, and it might require changing one thing here, one thing there. There's not always a playbook, but there are usually precedents that you can kind of help to figure out how you have to maneuver. When I think about innovation, I think of a situation where you step into the unknown. There is no charted territory. It's, you're kind of going blind. And interestingly, I thought of this story a few weeks ago, so I'm going to share an anecdote, which I think is a good analogy to this adaptation versus innovation question. And it's also a sea story, and sea stories are fun. Many years ago, when I was still a young naval officer, we were deployed to the Arabian Gulf, and I was stationed on an amphibious warship. So for those of you who aren't familiar, amphibs are these kind of flat-bottom ships, and they have a well deck in the back. You can think of it kind of like a garage. You open the back, you flood it a little bit, and it allows amphibious vehicles to come in and out of the garage, essentially. So we were doing amphibious operations in the Great Arabian Gulf, and one of our amphibious vehicles broke down. It's really unfortunate, had some sort of malfunction. And this is post 9/11. So, we're not going to broadcast to the world that we have this malfunctioned vehicle, but it had broken down really close to territorial waters of another nation, and the wind and currents were kind of every second moving in closer and closer, so it really needed to be rescued. Well, as luck would have it, there was also a really bad sandstorm that had just come off the coast. And again, for those of you who haven't been in sandstorms recently, this was my first and last sandstorm. It's not just a little bit of dust, kind of flying through the air. This is like 15 feet of visibility. You can't really breathe. You got to be careful with your eyes because it can really damage your eyes. And interestingly, it also messes up comms channels. It messes up radar, so there was no way for us to find our hovercraft using radar. And so we had this kind of confluence of events that made the situation very difficult. And I happened to be what's called the conning officer, the person driving the ship that day. And so, again, I thought of this a couple of weeks ago, and it's kind of silly, but it's a lot like innovation. You are navigating in zero visibility. You have no signals, so you don't have comms or radar, so no signals to tell you what to do or where to go. You're making decisions amidst a bunch of ambiguity. You have time pressure because in this case, we couldn't, casually let our vehicle drift into territorial waters. And so there are these kind of challenges that really cropped up and blockers that keep you in innovation from really succeeding. And so maybe some of the challenges we can focus on today a little bit that kind of go to this, what is innovation, include accountability, complexity, and in particular moral complexity, and friction, and more specifically the temptation to go frictionless. And so, yeah, I think innovation is this navigating through the sandstorm sort of situation.
That's a very vivid picture. I've been in more than one of those sandstorms in the Middle East, so I know exactly. And you talk about the friction. Of course, that's like the sand hitting you in the face, and you're blinded. Can you give me an example where you were in the sandstorm and you're innovating in your either in your current job or in your past work?
Yeah, I mean, So one of the places where I did the most, we'll call it like hardcore innovation, was at Facebook. At the time, it was still called Facebook. And a lot of the technologies that we were building didn't really exist out there in the wild. We would do some really fundamental research on, I think you mentioned it, privacy-enhancing technologies. We would do some fundamental research on AR and VR. Everyone kind of knows about the failed metaverse experiment, but the technology kind of lives on today. And so one of the things we were sometimes unsure about when we were creating some of these new technologies was, okay, we built it, our engineers made it work. Do we take it out into the world? Is it ready? Do we know whether or not this technology is going to be successful once it's in the hands of other people? Do we know what they're going to do with the technology once it's in the hands of other people? And, it was always a really difficult assessment to understand whether or not what we were building was going to have good impact or bad impact or whatever. I'm no longer there, so, I can't speak to what they're doing nowadays, but when I was at Meta, we would kind of agonize, there would be teams kind of agonizing over, okay, we have this new technology, we have this new feature, we have this new product. Let's look at it from a safety angle, let's look at it from a privacy angle, let's look at it from a policy angle and a politics angle, because a lot of our products would impact elections or things like that. Just so much deliberation, so much what we call red teaming, kind of trying to break the thing and see how people might misuse it. Ultimately, we would sometimes launch a product and find that it has some problems and have to figure it out. And then other times, we get it right. But it was very much navigating unknowns, and on top of that, unknowns. And what was really, I thought, interesting, both in the hovercraft example and then in this Facebook example, is we all had, at every single moment of the way, every excuse to blame failure on something. If it was a sandstorm with the weather, we didn't have radar, we were on a flat-bottom ship that doesn't exactly turn on a dime, like an Italian yacht or something. We had every excuse to blame the situation if things didn't go well. And same thing at Meta, every excuse to blame the political environment, we just didn't have enough computing power for whatever the product was. So what my experience was in both of those situations was that nobody had that mindset. I and all of my colleagues around me really took ownership over the things that we could control and said, hey, I'm going to be accountable for my role in this. You're going to be accountable for your role in this. She's going to be accountable. He's going to be accountable. And with all of us kind of embracing that mindset of accountability, we were really able to go through what was a very difficult situation and succeed when it would have been really easy to just say, like, I'm going to try my best, but if it doesn't work, then it's not my problem. That kind of mentality of taking ownership, I think, really enabled us to work together and figure out creative solutions sometimes and actually do something at the end, again, that we were proud of.
So that's a great story, and you have described that your team was very deliberate, and you looked at various avenues, and I love the idea of ownership, and we took our part. And so we might come away from what you just said that, hey, this was easy, and there were no moral hazards involved when we rolled that product out. Hey, boss, we looked at every single angle, and we're positive when we roll this out, metaverse being an example, that everybody's safe, it's ethically sound. And yet, you had a team, you had others, and that responsibility is distributed. So how do you stay grounded on that and deal with the moral hazards that arise almost right away when you have a new innovative product on the market?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm wondering if we can ask the audience a question about this.
Sure.
Okay, so let's say we launch a new AI product into the world. By a show of hands, who thinks that if something goes wrong with that product, the engineers who built it are to blame?
Do we have our poll?
Oh, can we do a fancy poll?
Yeah.
Let's do a fancy poll instead. Let's use our technology. So here's some options. Vote to see who you think is actually to blame if something goes wrong.
See, this is technology. This is a moral hazard. If we could bring up the poll, if we have it. Okay, great. I'm looking at the back.
Like the organization is winning.
Okay, Alejandra, it says, the autonomous system causes harm. Who is accountable? And it looks like 68% believe the deployer or the organization, 30% believe it's you, the coder or the engineer, and only 3% think it's the robots or the system or machines.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So even though it looks like there's some consensus, rough consensus around the organization, it's still quite mixed. And we could add a ton of different options here. When we talk about the organization, is it the leadership of the organization? Is it a particular team within the organization? Is it, the CEO of the organization? And lots of studies have been done on this exact question, and the answer is that nobody knows the right answer. We don't, as a society, know the right answer. What's the optimal place to kind of lie the blame and the accountability so that we can create the incentives for people to build good systems. So in a world where accountability is distributed, where it's not really easy to know who to look to place the blame should something go wrong, what I do is that I remember that I have my part to play, and where that accountability gets blurry, integrity really kicks in, and doing the best that I can to make sure that what I'm contributing and what I'm doing with my colleagues is really aligned with my own values, with what I believe is right. And what's really interesting about this is it's quite contagious. If you come in with that mindset, what I have found is that more often than not, people will either mirror that or hopefully bring that themselves. And before you know it, you have people who are collectively trying to do the right thing, even if they're not the ones officially on the chopping block, should something go wrong.
Yeah, great. Folks, what I'd like to do now, I still have some more questions. You're not off the hook yet. What I'd like to do now, if you have some questions in mind, please queue up on one side or the other, as we did yesterday to the microphone, and I'll try and integrate you into the conversation here. Because I think she has another question for you, which is about complexity.
Oh, right, yes. So one of the other challenges that I think often come up in this world of innovation is moral complexity. Based on my understanding, you guys really did some fantastic work on that yesterday. And so one of the things I want to ask and pose to you all to start and kick this off is there ever, has there ever been a time when you made a decision that felt right in the moment, but only after the fact you realized that there were some unintended consequences or something went wrong. So think about it for a second, and then if you feel like it, I'd love to hear from a couple of folks who maybe want to share what an example of that was. So you made a tough decision, you thought you had the right answer, and then something went wrong that you weren't expecting. And I know that at least somebody out there has experienced this.
Better decision makers than me. Anybody? We're going to come back to you all.
Oh, we've got
somebody great.
a brave soul. Thank you so much. Woo! Yeah, that's right.
Morning, ma'am. Cadet Roach here. So hopefully our higher rankers in the room, and don't get on me too much, but us at the sergeant level and the company level this year, one of the traditions we have here is like a stair climb for 9/11, and it wasn't scheduled on 9/11 this year, and us at the company level were a little bit upset about that, and we didn't have all the facts, and our higher rankers did, and we kind of were just like, oh, well, like we can go around the chain of command and we can just do it ourselves and really interject ourselves to the commandant, and that's what we did. And as soon as we did it, the next day we find out from the higher rankers, like the regimental guys, that like there's way more planning and resources that go into planning an event like this, and there was outlier reasons that played into the scheduling piece. And as soon as they kind of filled us in on all that, and they were like, hey, we already tried this, we kind of felt like, man, like, maybe it wasn't the best decision in the world. So going around the chain of command definitely isn't a good idea, unless you're absolutely certain. And we did it, and we found out after the fact that it was not the best idea in the world. So.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I think all of us can sympathize. Thank you, by the way, again, for sharing. I think all of us can sympathize with this moment where you make a decision that you think is the right, you really, really believe it's the right thing to do, and then later it turns out that there's some complexity. And so one other small C story, because I don't get to share them very often, so I'm going to take advantage. My second shift, we were outfitted to do counter-piracy operations, and this is post Captain Phillips. All of the merchant ships at this point kind of had their standard SOPs for what you do if your ship gets apprehended by pirates. And we found a ship that had been taken over by pirates, and so we were the nearest ship to that, and we were sent off to do the rescue. I mean, this is really exciting stuff, right? You're deployed, you get to rescue a ship from pirates, helicopters everywhere. We had a recon marine team on board who did, executed a portion of it. It was really cool. What I didn't realize is after the fact, when we brought these folks on board, these pirates on board, they were close to being starving. The weapons that we had seen that they were carrying were so rusted through. They couldn't do anything except maybe throw them at you. Later I learned a little bit that where these pirates would go is probably, they were from Somalia, so they were from a failed state. They wouldn't go back to Somalia. They would probably go to Kenya, be locked up for a couple of days, and then Kenya would let them go because Kenya didn't have the resources to keep them locked up and put them through a trial and so on and so forth. And so all this stuff that seemed really heroic and exciting and just, black and white good at that moment, once I learned more about the situation, I realized that there was a lot more complexity to it. And so, in innovation, those kinds of situations happen all the time where you're like, this is definitely going to be awesome. We're going to launch this product into the world. It's going to do all these great things. And then there's just a lot of stuff that comes up that makes it really complex.
Yeah, so that's a great C story. I like it. Builds on yesterday, we were working through a hostage rescue scenario to look at the complexity there that mirrors what you found in real life. So in real life today, especially, let me segue a little bit to your work with AI. Can you talk about, with AI specifically, the moral complexity that you're seeing as this continues to evolve?
Yeah, it's all the time. I mean, one thing that's come up a lot is AI in the workplace. I really like, or in school, I really like this example where it of course makes sense that you would have a tool that makes you more productive, makes you able to do more work faster, it helps you to learn faster, and this, in work, it just, accelerates what everybody can do. Of course it sounds great. It's good for the workers, it's good for the organizations that employ people using AI because they're getting more productivity. It's great for the companies providing the AI because they're making money. So looks net positive all around. Of course, there's some downsides to it. There's an obvious downside, which is that, on the labor side of things, jobs are shrinking, and there's this real well-founded fear of just unemployment and lack of work to go around. There's also this deeper thing where, this obsession with productivity and efficiency and all of that kind of eats away at the purpose, the why of what we do at work or in school. There's tons of research to show that having a why and having a purpose is really important for us all. And AI, in accelerating everything that you can do, kind of strips that intentionality away a little bit. And so, that's a very unintended consequence of what on the surface looks like a great tool for everybody all around. And the truth is, I don't think anyone knows what to do yet. I don't think anyone knows what to do on the labor side of things about jobs. I don't know if people really understand even the impact on the kind of purpose element of it. So that's just one example. I'm happy to share tons more.
Well, that's a great story and some great insights there. If you think about AI and the efficiencies it's bringing, and you bring up the human element in that. So as a team leader in developing these, how do you ensure that as your team's doing the coding and working with the AI tools, that they are building in sort of the human in mind, the user in mind, that is ethical when they're going to get to an ethical use of it rather than, well, we can mention many bad uses of AI even now.
Yeah.
But how do you, as the leader, build in right from the get-go using this tool ethically?
It's a great question, and I think there are many ways to do this right, or at least try to do it right. The way I approach it is that even when we're building technology, I primarily think of it as building something that will be for humans. So the coding aspect of it, the kind of hardcore kind of technical elements of it, it's almost like I put those aside for a second and say, okay, first of all, what is the purpose? What's the why of what we're building? What kind of impact are we trying to have in the world on individuals that might be using our product, or collectively as communities? How might this impact communities? And starting there kind of takes you down all sorts of interesting paths. And one of the things that I've always been really careful of is working closely with people from the design discipline. So folks who, by their training and by their nature, are really thinking about humans first. One of the really kind of fancy new disciplines is human-machine teaming. So we actually have a human-machine teaming director at Pasteur Labs who starts with, okay, if a human, first of all, there's an assumption that there's teaming, if there's no replacement. So it's kind of embedded in the title. But in addition to that, every angle of how there might be some interaction between, whatever it is that we're building in a human gets this kind of lens of, okay, how can we really enhance the experience? Not just to achieve something faster and and better and kind of drive that efficiency. Like that's definitely a goal, but more like how can we make people feel really proud of what they're building using this tool? How can we strengthen the communication between different teams, with amongst our customers? How can we make an engineer feel like they have the best tool at their fingertips so that they can focus on what they are best at and not distracted by other things? So this kind of design element, and then the ethics lens, the purpose, the vision, all of that kind of comes together, and then we get to building the technology and the code and all of that.
That human-robot interaction there sounds like that word you used before, friction. Do you want to expand upon that idea?
Yeah, it's a great segue to this topic of friction. It's one I've been thinking about a lot recently. So most digital technology is built with this notion of reducing friction, make everything user-friendly, make everything as easy as possible for the user. And one of the things that's gotten my attention is that maybe there are some places where actually having friction is really important, keeping it. Even if you could get away with removing it, maybe sometimes it's best to keep it. And, this is not a sea story, but kind of a silly example. Many years ago, I hurt my back. And so as a result of the injury, I went through tons of therapy and a lot of discomfort at the gym, tons of physical therapists helping me to restore my strength and all of that. And because of doing that hard, very uncomfortable work today, if one of my dogs pulls me and I fall, instead of re-injuring my back, I'm okay, because I kind of put in the work, went through that resistance, went through the friction of working out and, restoring the strength. And that's kind of a silly example, but I think probably many of you here can analogize to yourself, like maybe you pushed yourself to run that extra mile or worked extra hard to study for that one exam and ended up getting an A or maybe a B, but at least you worked really hard and you're proud of that. And that kind of friction in our lives, those difficult things, I think are the things that forge who we are. They forge our minds, they forge our muscles, they forge our morals. Earlier in the recap from yesterday, you talked about the crossing over the bridge. And I think friction is what helps you to develop the ability to do that. So in AI today, in particular, one of the things we're seeing is let's just get rid of all the friction. And it's having some pretty dire consequences. So some of you may have heard, recently in the news, there was this series of really horrible stories of people using different AI chatbots and then either resulting in a suicide or an attempt at suicide. And the chatbots, because they're what's called sycophantic, so they're always trying to make the user feel good and remove all the friction in the experience, just kept encouraging these poor people who were crying out for help. But instead of designing a product that really pushed back and said, like, hey, maybe it's time to stop using me as a product and reach out for help from a human. They just kept encouraging these users to keep going down this self-harm path. A couple of these have resulted in actual deaths, which is really tragic. And that's just one example. They're not all that tragic, but it's a theme that's really starting to, I think, get out of whack, more so than the past several years.
So that's interesting, because the whole idea behind these technologies is to become a friction-free society so we can live easier, no worries. But your argument is you need a little bit of friction, positive friction, to make the product better, but also as a check on the ethical use of this product. Can you think of another example, probably many, where AI, you needed that friction to recorrect the product?
Yeah, I'll share two. So one example that comes to mind is there was this really interesting study out of MIT recently that showed what happens to your brain when you use ChatGPT. And so the experiment was set up such that people had to, write a report or, do some sort of task. And some people didn't use ChatGPT at all. Some people used ChatGPT from end to end, and then some people started without ChatGPT and then used it at the end to kind of check their work or improve it. So these three groups. And what the study found, and it was a preliminary study, so there's going to be a lot of follow-up, I think, but what the study found was not very surprising. The folks who didn't use ChatGPT at all had a lot of brain activity. So they were really, really engaged in using their brain, and after the fact, after they wrote their report or whatever it was that they were supposed to do, they had really deep, intimate knowledge of what was in the thing that they had written. The folks who used ChatGPT end-to-end kind of didn't really know anything about what went into the thing that they had written. So, I mean, it's not that they weren't doing the work, they just, they didn't internalize it, which was kind of interesting. And their brain activity was pretty low. And then the folks who started without ChatGPT and then added ChatGPT at the end had, I think it was the highest amount of brain activity, but they kind of had the best performance of, all three groups because they had the internalization of the information, but also that kind of boost at the end from the ChatGPT to really improve their work. And so, what do we make of all of that? I mean, I think it's too soon to draw too many conclusions, but it's probably that you still need to do some of the hard work, like learning analog style in some sense. It's probably still really important. And it's okay maybe to get some boost from something like ChatGPT, but only after you've done the hard work.
Okay, ChatGPT, favorite subject around here as we're trying to figure out what are the right ethical parameters for using AI. It's out there, it's going to be out there, it's going to get better as we go. I think it is a challenge. I'll speak as a professor here. I think it is a challenge in some ways for what you just pointed out. So maybe we need to come back to one of the early points you made about accountability.
Yeah.
So any thoughts about using this kind of technology? Again, sounds like maybe ChatGPT enhanced my argument if I already had my paper. But on the same hand, how do I hold it accountable for the information it's giving me? And how do I hold myself accountable for ethical use of that technology?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, like navigating into the low visibility areas where we don't really know the quote unquote right answers. Some thoughts that I would have are, in the first place, if you're going to use something like ChatGPT, especially if it's for something beyond, just initial research or something like that, I believe in disclosing that you use ChatGPT. Just like you would cite your sources, if you consulted a book or a website, I always say, I use ChatGPT, and then I say what I used it for, to proofread, to, engage in some sort of debate to help pressure test my argument. So I very much believe in doing that, because if it does give people a boost, it's kind of only fair to disclose where you got that boost from. And then whenever you use it, it still hallucinates, it makes up answers. So I think it's always really important to check your sources. It always makes mistakes, and there's more than one example of like a lawyer showing up to court and citing a case before a judge, and that case doesn't exist. That's really embarrassing. So don't let that happen to you.
Yeah, that's great advice. What we'd like to do now, we have a few minutes left. Let's get some questions from the audience because Alejandra wants to hear from you, and you are the users of all of these technologies, and each school out there has different policies. UMI is developing policies, but it's going to be out there. We're going to use it. We need to exploit the strengths of it, but there are some ethical, moral hazards. So let's hear from you. What are your thoughts? Sir, here on the left.
Hello, ma'am. My name is Liam Smith. I'm a cadet at the Virginia Military Institute. Earlier in the conversation, we talked about getting blindsided by consequences we hadn't think about. And this topic was about AI. So I was wondering, some people are already ringing alarm bells about possible environmental costs as well as content that AI produces. So how do you navigate these moral complexities when people are already sounding off alarms? Thank you.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think that a lot of the challenge is identifying what these potential consequences might be in the first place. I mean, we can never tell the future. Sometimes we are truly blindsided. But I think that there's plenty of work to be done to actually stop and think, imagine the product that you're using out in the wild, and stop and think and try to assess what are some likely things that could go wrong. One of the things that we sometimes do in the tech space is before really launching a product, we'll do like a pre-launch and test it out with a smaller audience. And they know that they're helping us test it out, and it can sometimes help us to understand some of the unforeseen consequences. But part of your question is, what about when you already know what the consequences are or might be, and they're pretty dire, and sometimes they're pretty big? I think that's really tough. So one of the things that most tech companies do is they'll work with civil society groups, they'll work with academia, they'll work with various other organizations and try to see if there are different types of solutions, policy solutions, technology solutions, other sorts of ways to create incentives or better ways to approach whatever it is that might go wrong. I will tell you that environmental one is a tough one. I'm not really quite sure how we're going to grapple with that as a society, but that one's going to be an interesting one to watch. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Over here on the right.
Hello, my name is Clara Perlman. I'm from Christopher Newport University. And I thought it was interesting what you were saying about AI in the classroom. I took a class, I'm a history major. I took a class last spring, and we were actually asked and forced to use AI in our curriculum. What we had to do is we wrote basically a 15-page essay at the end of our semester. It was one of our writing intensives. And we had to use AI along the process. And we used actual additional essays at the end of each assignment where we did have AI used. And we explained what we did and how we used it, and how we questioned it and made it stronger, and how it made our arguments stronger. And we did actually look for sources, and every single person that looked for sources, they didn't exist. But my question for you is, what is your advice, and what would you recommend to professors and to leaders around the world who do not believe in using AI?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, far be it for me to tell people what to do or think. I'll just share my own perspective. I think that this is one of those technologies that is out there and people are going to use, whether or not you allow them to. We've seen this in the workplace. So in many companies, they've said, no AI use, period. It's not allowed. And I think a couple of years ago, they started doing research and finding that all of those companies where they said AI use is not allowed, people were using AI. And because it wasn't embraced by the enterprise, then they were doing it in ways that were dangerous for security or privacy or things like that. So I think AI is one of those, and LLMs in particular are some of those technologies that it's out there, people are going to use it. And so I think it's really helpful to embrace that fact and figure out, okay, how can it be a booster for me in the classroom? And what kinds of guardrails do we want to agree upon as a classroom so that folks can still learn what they need to learn? And so your experience in using AI that you just described is its own learning experience. Maybe there's something new to learn. Maybe there's an opportunity to learn to use tools like AI better and better over time, and so on and so forth. So that's what I would say. Just it's happening, and so it's not a moral hazard in and of itself. It's a moral hazard if you use it incorrectly, and so might as well try to create the incentives and the guardrails to use it in a way that's aligned with your own values and integrity.
Thank you.
Great, please.
Morning, ma'am. My question sort of goes off of that. It's in regards to innovation and also social stability. We can see that AI, it does have very definite uses. It is very useful, but it also creates a lot of social instability. You said yourself about the job aspect, and also in the way of people not really understanding what they're even doing, because like that study you cited, having an AI bot do it and them not gaining the understanding of that. How do we, creating these new things, we both balance making innovation and actually creating new things and not stifling that, while also making sure that we're not blindly and arrogantly throwing something out into the world that might cause real detrimental effects, and that we actually take that into account?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and people have different views on the answer to your question. Right now, there's kind of this big debate that's really playing out globally, where you have folks saying, well, regulation is the answer. If we just regulate things and create the rules, then that will make sure that everything goes right. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there are folks who say, like, no, let's just throw things out in the world and the market will tell us, when things are and are not going well, and we'll kind of figure things out as we go along. And I think there are strengths and weaknesses to both sides, and then everything in between. I think that from a societal or systemic point of view, probably some regulation would be helpful. Probably some market incentives would also be helpful. But when it comes to organizations and the people within them, I think it goes back to the theme of our conversation. It really comes down to individuals who believe in something and make small decisions that ultimately collectively add up to big decisions along the way in putting out a product that they're proud of, that they've tested, that they've really thought carefully about. I think that's kind of practically for you and me and for most people in the world, how it is that we make a difference and have the outcomes that you just mentioned. These kind of big questions about how politics and policy will play out, they'll be informed by the kinds of day-to-day decisions that people make in organizations. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does, thank you, ma'am.
Great.
Good morning, ma'am. My name is Hayden Millick, representing the Defense Civilian Training Corps at Virginia Tech. My question for you is, as you're developing an innovative solution, whether that be the metaverse or a new AI product, how and at what point do you start defining the moral red line that you're looking to not cross, and how do you process against that through the design process?
Yeah, those are also great questions. So I have two things. The first is that, in my humble experience, my opinion, I think it's really important for you to know your own moral red lines way ahead of time. Starting from the time you're a kid, probably, you start learning who you are, what your character is, what you believe in. And so I think it's really important for you to kind of develop and continue to actively develop your own kind of red lines along the way. In part because sometimes when you're part of an organization, if the organization's leadership or whoever puts you in a situation where you have to cross that line, you have to know when it's time to step away. So that's one thing I would say. The second thing is that I think, we talk about this a lot in organizational leadership. Each of you, I'm sure, has had many conversations like this. organizations really ought to have values and understand what they are, and not just the values, but what they look like in action. I think a lot of organizations will spit out some values and then that's it. Like, cool, that sounds great. But what do they actually look like in action? And having some clarity around that and having that be a sustained conversation, which ultimately creates the culture of an organization. And so if you do those two things ahead of time, not at the last minute, not when you've already built this new thing, it suddenly becomes a lot easier to test whatever this new thing that you're building is along the way. What I have seen in my career is that the most difficult situations arise when one of those or both of those things hasn't happened, where the values aren't clear, the organizational values, or the personal values aren't clear. And that's where you get into situations where people are like, oh, well, we built this whole thing and it's already built and now we invested so much money into it and our competitors are ready to launch something, but we don't know if we're okay with it. Oh, well, we're just going to launch it and see what happens. So it's kind of an indirect answer to your question, but I really think that kind of doing that homework ahead of time is the best way.
Fantastic. Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for coming out today, Cody from VMI. I just wanted to know how you would address educators coming into the field of AI, where we're already seeing young students' attention spans are just dying. Students can't read as long as they used to be able to. There's a lack of critical thinking being seen in schools right now. And I just wanted to hear how you would address these issues, especially as we're getting into an area where young students are constantly using AI to the point where critical thinking is just not a skill that's being seen anymore, and how you think that should be addressed in schools up until like from middle school to college level education.
I mean, that's a golden question. I will say I'm not an educator, so I'm not going to pretend to know the right answer. I can say that some of my colleagues who are in the education space have really seen AI as both a cause of everything that you said, but also as a potential tool to help maybe kind of redirect some of these things. So I think, what we talked about a little bit earlier, how to embrace AI and use it in the classroom or in the workplace or wherever, I think that's probably part of the ingredient. I'm sure there are other kind of factors that go into educational systems and funding that I'm just not well versed in, but I do think that question that you raised is a really important one, and it kind of reminds me of one of the questions I think about a lot, which is, what kind of society are we actually trying to build as we innovate and create these new technologies? And how do we create the right incentives to help us get there? I think some of these questions, like the one you raised, are quite complex and difficult. And I think if folks are really committed to making things better and intentional about the decisions they made, the decisions they make and the things that they build that maybe make their way to the classroom, I think there's potential for improvement and kind of redirecting some of the not so good patterns that you pointed out.
Thank you, ma'am.
Over here. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for speaking today. My name is Cadet Thomas Gannon from BMI, and you did touch on this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to know, when you spoke about the relationship between AI and intentionality in the workplace, what is your perspective on the consequences of AI displacing human users from their work purpose, and in a time where the nature of replacement is so prevalent with human work and AI, and we see this with the tech companies that use heavy amounts of AI like Duolingo and other kinds of learning platforms. How do you retain that human work purpose, and do you think it's deceptive to the users to have AI be such a key fundamental part of their platform?
Yeah, you guys are all asking such really, really good questions and very difficult ones. I think when it comes to the workplace, so a couple of things. I think that this issue of AI kind of replacing workers, I don't know if you've kept up with the news, but a lot of the companies who have actually tried to do this have very quickly done a 180 and kind of rehired a bunch of people back. Because it turns out that you can't just replace humans with AI. It doesn't actually quite work that way. It's unfortunate for the people that had to kind of go through this experience, but it is a really important lesson to say that AI is artificial. It is not a human. That said, I think with the rise of efficiencies that AI is bringing, there almost certainly will be some displacement of jobs and employment and things like that. And so one of the things that I don't think I'm going to answer all the aspects of your question because I think they're kind of big issues, but one of the things that I think about these days is if AI is taking up some of the kind of more basic fundamentals and kind of, we'll call it the earlier parts of your work in terms of a career trajectory, then what does that do for the pipeline of employees over time? You know, if you don't do some of the basics as a junior employee somewhere, you don't really learn things very well, which means that you're never going to become a mid-level manager, a good mid-level manager, which means that you're never going to become a good senior leader, a good senior contributor. And so a lot of this introduction of AI into the workplace, I think, is creating not just an employment displacement problem, but actually a pipeline problem where who are going to be our future experts? Who are going to be our future leaders? Because they didn't do a lot of the kind of work that you might have at an introductory level job. So one of the things I like to focus on is, again, like how do we more intentionally use AI to enhance or improve the experience of someone, as opposed to thinking of it as replacing them or making it too frictionless. Like sometimes you still have to do the work the hard way, the long way, just so that you can learn it and then use AI. It's kind of like how, I don't know how many of you have had a math class where your teacher or professor wouldn't let you use a calculator. I had lots of those and I hated them for it at the time. But then after the fact, you realize, oh, I really, really deeply understand the concepts, and now I can use the calculator and it's okay. So very similar with AI in the workplace. So I don't think that answers your full question, but hopefully gives you something.
Thank you, ma'am. Morning, ma'am. Good Richardson from BMI. Today we're seeing a lot of how efficient and innovative AI can be in making it more convenient for businesses, but at the same time, there's this element of it can degrade the trust that consumers have in businesses that use AI because it tends to make things up or still have a lot of errors in that system. So how do we fact check or even use AI to fact check AI and kind of, maybe there's a disclaimer, maybe it's something else, but really prove the validity of these statements that AI is coming up with and we continue to see in our daily lives?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So there's a lot of work that's happening on the technological side of this. So AI is checking AI, reducing the rate of hallucinations in the first place, better tailoring AIs for particular use cases, so it's much better at whatever the topic at hand is. I think there's also a lot to be done around education and helping people to understand what these AI tools are and are not. I don't know if you all remember, I think it was 2023, Air Canada had a chatbot that offered a discount to somebody, to some customer, and then it turned out that discount didn't exist. The chatbot had made it up, and the customer sued Canada Air. And Canada Air claimed that it was not their fault, it was the chatbot. The chatbot was the one that had made it up, and basically tried to blame the chatbot. The court said no. Air Canada, I just called it Canada Air, but no, Air Canada, you're responsible. It's your chatbot, you're responsible. And so I thought what was really useful about that happening so publicly is it created this now legal incentive to say, like, okay, if you're going to use these tools, organizations, you better do your homework to make sure that they're doing and saying and functioning the way that you expect them to. Otherwise, at least in that case, we're going to hold you accountable. So I think, there are these technological solutions, there are probably some accountability, formal accountability solutions and other incentives. And then this kind of education bit that I think is probably useful and important.
Thank you.
So folks, we're actually over time, and I know there's more of you out there. What I'd like to do is take a question from here and a question from there. Alejandra's going to be with us throughout the day, so if you didn't get to ask your question in the audience, you'll get a chance out in the Hall of Bella. So let's start over here, please.
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Cadet Alejandra Orlandoni from VMI. And my question to you is, in your professional opinion and regarding your service history, what do you project will be the first and or biggest problem that AI might pose to the military side of things?
That's a great question. I think that's already happening, though. I don't know about the biggest, but I'll name a couple that I know are already really worrisome. One is automated decision-making in weapons. So automated weapons, that's been a conversation for many years. AI has really just ratcheted that way, way up. And so when is an autonomous AI-driven weapon system okay? When isn't it? What kinds of guardrails are necessary? How do we introduce things like that in an international stage? Because we don't control other nations. So if we do something to escalate capabilities, what might the response be from other nations? And so I think that's one issue. The other one that has been popping up a lot more recently is using AI for inference. Just taking a bunch of intel, a bunch of information, a lot of data, and having AI be the one to kind of assimilate it and analyze it and then draw out inferences. And using those inferences, military leaders will be making lots of decisions. What if those inferences are wrong? What if the data was incomplete? What if there was a hacker and inserted false data, false information? I think that's going to probably be a rising issue that, especially in a fast-moving scenario, is going to be really difficult to grapple. So no shortage of issues. Those are just two that come to mind.
Thank you, ma'am.
Last question.
Hi, ma'am. Cadet Aguilar Fricky. My question is, so we all know that AI systems are becoming more autonomous. What's your advice to us as future leaders, whether it's in the workforce, the field, or in schools, to maintain ethical accountability without suppressing innovation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it goes back to this theme of this entire conference and kind of where we started the discussion today with the hovercraft incident. I think you really need to do the work to understand who you are, what your own values are. I think you need to have the courage to ask really hard questions, no matter where you are, no matter what the pressures are. You have to know when to walk away when something just isn't right for you, but you also have to have the courage to take some chances and venture into the unknown. So that's the innovation part, and then just really trust your own inner compass, trust your own integrity, trust that trust your own leadership. And through that, just make decisions that you can be really proud of. Those micro decisions really do add up. Make decisions you can be proud of time and time again. And if you combine all of those things, I think you'll be able to do some really fun, innovative things, but also feel good about what it is that you're contributing at the end of the day.
Thank you.
I think you stole my last question. That's good. Alejandro, we were having a discussion. I'm going to let you close this up. We were having a discussion about what happens after graduation. We have a lot of folks here. Some are going to go in the military. Some are going to go into the civilian world. You've done both. What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time when you're kind of starting off your career. And what I have learned, I've had kind of I call it a non-linear career, kind of twisty, windy road. It's had a constant through line, but it's definitely not been a well-trodden path. And so what I would say to you is ask questions of many people. Ask them what they do. Ask them what they like about it. Ask them what is really difficult about it. And really explore within yourself what starts to resonate with you. What is really important to you? What kind of impact do you want to have? And then just know and feel comfortable that there are almost zero perfect linear path careers. They almost don't exist. And so what's important is for you to stay curious and for you to keep your integrity and to kind of keep forging your own path that's right for you. I mean, I went from a military career and as an engineer, I ended up meandering into the law. And after some time, I spent less and less time in the law and more time thinking about this kind of intersection between policy and organizations and ethics and technology. None of that was a career that anybody could have predicted for me. So by talking with people, by asking questions, by looking for opportunities, and by always trying to stay true to what was really interesting to me and the kind of work that I wanted to do, been able to make some great decisions, some less great decisions, but always kind of moving forward and feeling like I'm going somewhere.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Alejandra. Thank you for coming and sharing your insights, really cutting edge insights about what's going on. It is reassuring to see that, at least in the company you're in, you're thinking about how these technologies are going to affect humans and our moral compass. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give Alejandra